So thanks for inviting me. I'm just going to share a quick example of a science engagement activity. We now understand the importance of us getting out there as scientists and actually promoting what we do, but not in a biased way, but just because we love what we do. And I work for the SAW Trust, which stands for Science, Art and Writing, and it's based at the John Innes Centre. I did start as a scientist, did my PhD and postdoc at John Innes, but love engagement so much that I'm now doing it full time. The SAW Trust is a registered charity that was set up in 2005, and it specialises in science-themed outreach projects and uses practical science and the creative arts to explore all sorts of science. Most of the projects take place in schools, so generally primary schools. Before children have decided whether they like science or they don't like science, they generally all like science, so it's a nice age to work with. And it gives scientists a platform to work with professionals from different backgrounds, so writers and artists, and to explore their research topics through different mediums with different groups. So the basic concept is that the scientific theme is the central piece, and then a set of scientific images will be chosen that underpin the theme, and the images link learning in science, art and writing, and that's just the general model. So for scientific images, just as an example, if you were going to run a project that was themed on fighting infectious diseases, then these are the sort of images that we would generally tell scientists to use, because they're not obvious, they're intriguing. You don't have to tell people what they are, so they can go on a creative journey with them. And when you work with artists and writers, they absolutely love it when you give them these images, because they just don't usually see them. And so these are the sorts of images we would use. So I'm going to show you an example of a SAW project that was run in September. There was a group of students from the iGEM competition, which is a synthetic biology competition that I'm sure you're all aware of. And they wanted to use a SAW project for their public engagement part of their contribution. So they worked with children aged 9 and 10 years old, and they worked with this teacher, Lenny, and they had a professional artist and writer join them for the project. So the scientists chose these images for their project. They wanted to explore the use of synthetic biology for addressing problems with the environment, so creating more drought-resistant plants. So there's cactus trichomes, desiccated landscape, some cogs, DNA, and E. coli. And so these images were given to the artist and the writer. And so for the science session, the children learnt about DNA code and structure. And at this age group, they don't really learn about this. So they'd heard of DNA from the TV, mainly from crime things. So they understand that DNA is used to track criminals, but they don't really know any more than that. So they got to build DNA structures out of plasticine, and they learnt about base pairing, and then they had different colours for the different bases that they sort of aligned up. And then they were asked to think of a modification that would enable a plant to survive in a drought environment. And so they gave an idea, and then they gave it a sequence, and then they put their little sequence on their structure. And then we asked them to draw their adapted plant and put it on our desert scene. So these are their modifications: protective chemicals, force field, suction cups for leaves, modified tap leaf, electric shield, super strong veins, modified water pipe route, spikes, legs to move, which is obvious, arms and a shovel to dig for water, ability to create a storm, eating bumblebees, not sure how that helps, shooting vines, water tank in the plant, and a wishing plant. So you can see that children have no boundaries to their thinking. They go crazy with this. And so they really enjoyed developing something new and feeling like a proper scientist. So then the images were used in the poetry, and the children were able to select images that they particularly liked. So I'll just read one. DNA, prison cell holding the secret of life, swirling ladder, ribbons of ice, processing, toy model, spiral around, rough, twisted metal, spiral world. and that was written by Jaden, who was 9. And I think they really enjoy this part, because often when you ask children to do a piece of writing, they can get quite, oh, I can't do it. But as soon as they're able to pick one of the images that they've been looking at, they then really focus. And I think you can see the science coming through just in small ways, that they're understanding that this DNA is kind of holding lots of information. So then for the art, we started with a discussion about natural versus man-made, and they used plastic cogs and put them into clay to make like this model that kind of represents the iGEM logo. And then they made some DNA-inspired mobiles and decorated them with different motifs. So again, it was kind of going back to the DNA structure. And so that was done in one school day, and the children were able to explore the science theme through different ways. So it wasn't exclusive to kids that perhaps didn't get on too well with the science. They were able to contribute. So, and just another example of something that I recently did with the Two Blades Foundation, who are based at the Sainsbury Laboratory. They work on stem rust disease of wheat, and so a lot of what they do is looking at resistance genes and bulking up resistance genes in wheat plants. And some of these kind of very lab-based science topics are very difficult to take into a classroom, and especially in a limited time. And so they actually designed a game that they could use to just get the concept across to the children. And so they had a choice of wheat varieties. I'm sorry, it's a bit fuzzy. This is a full-size science poster that's up in the corridor. So they had 3 wheat varieties with different yields, and then they had to pick one, and the different varieties had different numbers of resistance genes, and then they had a 20-sided dice that represented the fungus, and they basically had to roll the dice and see if it corresponded to a resistance gene in their plant, and if it didn't, then they had to colour a square on this grid brown. And so over this, they did it 100 times, and then they could really clearly see that the varieties that had more resistance genes actually stayed greener overall. And then whatever the disease, the final disease score was, they removed that amount of seed from the yield. So they could see that, okay, this is high yield, but it gets really diseased. So then you have to tip away 61% of your seed, that, you know, it's not very competitive. So games are a really underused way, I think, of getting concepts across in schools. And I've got this book here. This was a set of projects that was funded by BBSRC from 15 scientists from the Food Research and John Innes Centre. And this shows the creative output. So we've got a stack of them over there. So you can feel free to take one. We are a charity, so any donations are greatly received. And that shows lots of different scientists from all different backgrounds, so you can get a feel for what we can do. So that's SOAR, and I think, you know, it's important to get out there and actually promote what you do and share your passion for it. And if you want any information about doing a SOAR project, then you can get in touch with me or see the website for all sorts of projects. I can answer any questions. I'm happy to. Thank you.